Hello, everybody. My name is Chandler Kellogg. I'm the owner of Hot Button IO. We are a sales enablement and growth marketing agency, which is essentially to say a full service marketing agency. I've done a couple different presentations with the SBDC. I'll probably mention some of those presentations for ones that I'm not going to cover in depth on this one, as the topic is specifically website development. If you want any copy of those, you can reach out to me with the contact information at the end, or probably reach out to Robert or any of the other hosts, and I can make sure I get those to you. But topic for today is specifically website development. So this is kind of our outline that we're going through. So going through starting with the basics, business needs, domain name, all that kind of stuff, kind of the basic foundational components, and then working into what are you actually doing on the content creation and building it outside, and then considerations for kind of analytics, tracking, security, maintenance updates, and that at the end, kind of some budget and cost options after you get a sense of all the things that can be included in this type of package. And this is a little bit of a heftier presentation, so I'll try to keep it a little bit light and have some time for QA and conclusions at the end. But if we don't have a ton of time for that, you can also, book one-on-ones with me. I'll have my contact information at the end as well. So understanding the basics on here. So website development, that encompasses all the tasks and skills involved in creating, coding, and modifying websites, technical structure, visual design. So this is basically anything that goes into that component. It's a little bit more focused on kind of some of the technical components more so than the copywriting or the SEO, as we've touched on that some other presentations. But basically, some of the core components of that is the user experience, the UX, user interface UI, which the short version of those two, the differences between the two, user experience is basically the needs, goals, preferences. So what do your users want? What are they trying to do? And the user interface is basically how they actually execute those interactions. So it's the look and feel and the translation of those needs, goals, preferences. The other considerations that you're looking to in terms of the basic sense is scalability and flexibility. I would see a lot of small businesses tend to either over or underbuild. So these are all considerations that you want to have scoped out, not only in terms of what do you need, from day one for this website to be, but also how is it going to evolve over time with your business and who's taking care of those activities and what those activities are. And then search engine optimization, had another presentation that completely covered search engine optimization. So we'll kind of touch on the high points of this. But basically, search engine optimization is a very core part of the website build out to make sure that you rank, that you're visible, that you have organic traffic in addition to paid traffic and other sources, especially if you're trying to drive traffic from multiple sources. But search engine optimization specifically speaks to organic traffic, which is people typing your website into Google or related keywords and your website popping up for those keywords. So identifying business needs. So these are some of the things that you want to do. And we had a previous presentation where we kind of talked through what I typically like to work with businesses on is going through and doing your branding, a lot of that initial work in terms of identifying your needs, your services, your value proposition, things like that. So this ties into some of this. You want to have a sense of what you're buying and what you need before you go out and just shop, because a lot of times if you don't have these goals in place, you might be sold a package that is not in line with the actual needs of your business. So you want to get those primary objectives. For most small businesses, that's going to be using it at least for like lead generation, contact information, things like that. Brand awareness is obviously part of that, but typically, brand awareness, you'd be building those with a lot of external channels, and brand awareness help drive traffic to your website. So you want to think about what are those things you're trying to get out of this website, what is the ROI of this website, and figure out how those goals can be translated into a website package and features. So part of that is your target audience analysis, figuring out who is going to be visiting this website. That's especially important if you have considerations where you need to have data security, privacy, accessibility concerns, like if you serve primarily an older demographic or people that might have disabilities, making sure that you have good accessibility in terms of like tap target sizes, and we can get into more of that later. But figuring out who's going to use this and tailoring those behaviors to correspond with that audience. Feature requirement. I would say this is something that a lot of businesses do as an afterthought, and you want to kind of do it beforehand and figure out what functionality do I want on my website. And part of that ties into the competitor analysis at the bottom, taking a look at some websites that you like, that your competitors use, figure out what features they have. Do you need a CRM integration? Do you need a booking page integration? Do you need databases to be connected to this? That's all stuff that you want to figure out before you create a scope. Although agencies can help you create that scope if you aren't sure exactly what you need, but it's a good idea to get some of that together before you approach an agency or a freelancer. And then obviously budget constraints. We'll talk about this at the very end in terms of what these different types of tiers and packages can look like in terms of costs. But have a sense of what budget you're working with and prioritize the features accordingly. So kind of separate out the mission critical from the nice to haves, essentially. Choosing a domain name. So this is also ties into social handle availability. This ties into a lot of different things. And it is probably more important too for new businesses or ones where you're selecting a domain name that doesn't directly match your specific business. So for example, like, if you're naming your company Apple, well, A, you probably shouldn't do that in the first place, but B, you're not going to get apple.com. So, checking for brand alignment, make sure it aligns with your brand. It's easy to remember. It reflects your business identity and purpose. Simplicity and memorability. You want to have these be pretty short. I would say, at most like 2 words. I see some 3-word domains, and that just becomes like really hard to type in. You also have to think about, for people who are searching for your website directly, how easy is it to find this website? I typically recommend avoiding hyphens and numbers. Those are kind of soft rules, but I would say in general, try to avoid those. So single word, probably about 2 words tops. And then having the suitable domain extension .com, .net, .org, .gov. Make sure that you have one that aligns with your business. In most cases, everyone should try to secure the .com of your business, even if you don't use that as the primary domain, because you can set up a redirect. So like Hotbutton, for example, I have .io that's really popular with tech type companies. .ai is really popular. .co, those are all solid. And if you go to any of these domain registrars, they'll have a bunch of different variants of this name. So try to get the .com if it's relevant, although there are a lot more options now than there have been in the past. Availability checks, pretty much you'll be able to determine if it's available when you go to your domain registrar and figure out if it's available or not. So this should probably be a consideration in your branding exercise, that you're looking into that before you purchase your domain, where you're still thinking about the naming. You would also want to check your social handle availability. Auto renew setup, that's a pretty important one. Once you purchase this domain, make sure that you have it, especially if you're going to be using it for a couple of years. I typically just do the annual renewal, but if you know you're going to be in business for a long time, a lot of the domains are actually increasing in price. A good number of them are having a price hike this year. So in certain cases, you can lock in a good discount if you buy for 3 or 5 years. But in any case, you want to have that set up to auto renew by default, so you don't have an issue where you lose access to your domain and you either have your website taken down or you have to repurchase it at a much higher purchase price, or potentially both. And then privacy protection. This is especially important if you have a home-based business, because by default, whatever address you use to register will be associated with your website. So like I could perform a whois lookup and figure out whose name and address is associated with this website. And if that's your personal residence, you probably want to change that. So most domain providers have privacy protection options, and I would say that's especially important if you operate from home and you don't want people being able to figure out where you live. That's pretty important. Selecting a hosting provider, I would say for the vast majority of small businesses, this isn't something that you need to think super hard about, because most of the website platforms you all would use have this built in. So like if you go with Squarespace or Wix or even GoDaddy, for some of these, those have the domain purchase and the hosting kind of combined into that package. Typically, the ones that I recommend are for websites that are non-blog websites that are probably going to stay under about 250 pages at the most. I would say Webflow. Webflow technically has a hard cap of about 10,000 pages. If you're going to be writing a lot of content, if you're going to have a lot of pages, it's primarily info heavy. I typically recommend WordPress. And then if you have e-commerce, Shopify is my go-to. That kind of varies based on, developers that you would ask, agencies that you ask. Those are the 3 that I'm most comfortable with. But anyone in that kind of Webflow category, so the under 250 pages, a lot of times the hosting is included in that website package. But if you do WordPress specifically, you usually have to select a hosting provider. I typically use SiteGround. There's a number of other ones that I could recommend. But these are the considerations if you're actually picking a hosting provider separately from your website builder. So looking into your hosting needs, evaluate those needs, including storage, bandwidth, how many visitors you're having monthly, technical requirements. Those are all things you want to consider. Reliability and uptime. Honestly, a lot of these are like a dime a dozen. Yeah, you kind of just want to get something that's in your price range with the feature set that you have. They're all pretty interchangeable. That starts to matter a lot more if you have a very high traffic custom site. So for small businesses, it's just kind of really pick something in your price range, managed or not managed, depending on how you want to do it. Scalability, ensure that you can scale as your business grows, or at least have a plan in place to switch hosting providers when you need to do that in the future. Security measures, again, a lot of these are built in. A lot of these you don't really have to think super hard about. But like firewalls, SSL certificates, regular backups, a lot of that is built into these services. SiteGround, for example, manages a lot of that out of the box. The majority of these hosting providers that you would select are kind of synonymous with your drag and drop website builders. A lot of them have hosting providers. And in certain cases, like I think GoDaddy has this, and then I know a number of different ones do. Some of them also have email functionality, automatic backup, one-click installer. So you just need to evaluate all the different things that you need and whether you want kind of that all-in-one solution, website builder, email, DNS, everything, or if you want to separate up as services for whatever reason based on your use case. Types of hosting providers. This is what's kind of more important. This is what you should be looking at when you are selecting these. The vast majority of small businesses are going to be on a shared plan, especially if you're using the GoDaddy, the Wix, the Squarespace. Typically, those are shared. So shared is multiple websites hosted on a single server. It's the most economical option, but potentially you can have reduced performance and limited customization. These are typically the ones where you're getting it, somewhere between like $15 and $50 a month is shared hosting. Virtual private server, that's splitting a physical server into multiple virtual servers, each with its own dedicated portion of the resources. So essentially, it's just a little bit more customization, slightly better performance than the shared. And then you also have the option of dedicated. And this is really only for enterprise. So I'd say I wouldn't even really explore dedicated unless you're, starting like a bank or software as a service type company with like a web app. So it's going to be overkill for most small businesses. But if you have high traffic, you need lots of customization. Dedicated is a good option. And cloud, a lot of these are technically all cloud options, but really the difference is that for cloud is that you have multiple interconnected servers. You're paying for usability, and you can basically scale it up on demand. So all of these are technically located in the cloud. The cloud just speaks to whether you're going to, have physical server infrastructure, which almost no one does anymore, unless you're again enterprise and you want to have some kind of managed service. But so shared in one case is you have basically like a physical single server that is shared, and cloud would be that you have that distributed, resources across multiple servers. So cloud is the best option for scalability, but that's even kind of built above dedicated. Most of you are going to be going with shared. When it comes to designing the website, this goes into why I typically recommend that clients would have a lot of this branding package already built out, because your branding package, logo, brand colors, primary, secondary, tertiary, if you need it, colors, fonts, mission, vision, that all impacts copy, that impacts look and feel. So you really need to have a lot of that brand package dialed in before you work on your website build. Otherwise, you might not have good consistency on look and feel because you haven't really sorted that out before you've shopped. User-friendly navigation, this is super important, especially on mobile. Make sure that you have intuitive navigation, clearly labeled tabs, logical structure. A lot of that is before you actually get into the website component, building out a sitemap or a wireframe, where I typically do this with boxes. So you do your top level navigation and figure out where all the pages fit, just as like basically a box in a single word, to figure out how you might want to have that information logically structured. And then the wireframe is kind of like actually building that structure out. So you want to think hard about where things are located before you really start to build the website, especially if you're doing this yourself, because you will waste a lot of time building pages that you don't need or that don't have a lot of use, or the layout is confusing before you've actually, so you need to set that from the jump before you really start into building the actual components on page. Responsive design, this is super important 2023 and moving forward. By default, which I'm going to touch on this later, but by default, it's your ranking is primarily determined from your mobile experience, at least with Google. So you want to be optimizing for your mobile experience a little bit more than desktop. Obviously, you want to have good experience on both, but mobile is even more important than it has been in the past, because that's basically your site speed. If your site speed is much worse on mobile than it is on desktop, it's going to be based on your mobile ranking. So some consideration you want to have there. CTA placement, strategically placing clear and compelling CTA buttons to guide users and encourage conversions. I would say a lot of businesses have some kind of primary CTA, whether it's talk to sales, things like that. I have another repair business. It's called Green Screen Repairs. My primary button CTA, top right of the website, and basically everywhere on the website is get a repair quote. So for a lot of businesses, it's going to be like get a quote, contact us, talk to sales, things like that, book a meeting. Those are all things that you want to have. And for the critical CTAs, you want them to be higher on the page where they're easily accessible. Image and multimedia quality. We talk a lot about SEO. So what I'm mostly going to focus on for this presentation is images, because images is almost always the lowest hanging fruit for a lot of businesses. So you want to make sure that you have high quality, relevant images that enrich the content, and you want to make sure that you pick the right file formats, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But a lot of the site speed optimizations can be fixed with selecting the right images and making sure they're in the right formats with proper compression. And that goes into loading speed optimization. A lot of that is images, and then beyond that, it's typically optimizations within the website theme. Accessibility, there are tools to check that. We covered that in the SEO presentation, but basically you want to make sure, typically the main things with accessibility is text size, tap target size, at least on mobile, which is basically how big is the button and how close are they located to each other. So if the buttons are too small, too close, and you kind of fat finger two buttons, that's bad. You want to fix that. So tap target size, text size, and then color contrast ratios are the most common things that you're looking at there. Content creation and management. So crafting quality content, prioritize creating content that's relevant, informative, engaging to attract and retain your audience. In the SEO presentation, we talked about some topics that or tools that you can use to ideate that, but typically you're looking at two things. You're looking at keywords that you are trying to target that are relevant to your business. So in the case, for me, that would be, marketing, digital marketing, search engine optimization, things like that. So those are the target keywords. And then you can use a tool like Answer the Public, which we had in the SEO presentation, where I can actually figure out, who, what, when, where, why, what are the questions that people are asking related to that keyword that I can answer in a blog. Those are good topics to be able to figure out what questions are people asking, what content is already out there that has answered those questions, and how can I improve that content or answer it myself. Content authenticity, ensure it's original and authentic. You can get penalized in rankings if you are just copying and pasting content onto your website without setting up a proper RSS feed or content syndication structure. So you cannot just rip and copy and paste content. There really isn't an excuse to do that at this point, especially because we have tools like ChatGPT where you can, basically reword on demand a lot of different content. So you just want to make sure that you are not copying and pasting a bunch of content elsewhere on the web, because you will run into issues from that. Visual optimization, like I said, compressing file sizes, selecting the appropriate formats is super important. Regular updates and blogging. I would say for the vast majority of small businesses, something that I see a lot of small businesses waste a lot of money on is paying an agency or a freelancer some kind of retainer for updates and maintenance. We'll go over at the end of the presentation what things that you can handle yourself versus what you should pay for, but a lot of people just pay this big bucket of maintenance and updates for agencies that don't really do a whole lot of stuff. So really most of what you need after you build the website, especially if it's a simple website, under 50 pages with one of those drag and drop builders, really the majority of the updates are going to be blogging. So typically that looks like publishing, 4 to 5 pieces of content a month, especially if you're trying to do a really kind of targeted SEO blog type strategy. That's a target that I recommend. So, that'd be like one blog post a month or a week, essentially. And I know that might be a lot for some of you. So I would only worry about that if you're trying to really grow your rankings over time. Content strategy and planning, that kind of goes into that, but basically whatever tools and services you use to create that strategy. Again, you have to have a strategy in that you're not just posting whatever content comes to mind. I typically recommend that people focus on evergreen content, because a lot of businesses invest a lot of time and resources in creating, press results. Like, we just bought this new facility, we just opened this new thing, we just hired this new person, or their announcements that are time sensitive. As a small business, I would try to avoid that. Try to publish content that is evergreen, that is always going to be relevant, and that's going to rank over time, because a lot of the time sensitive content is not going to rank, and it's really probably a waste of effort and time in a lot of cases for small businesses. Image optimization, this is what I'll touch on because SEO, like I said, there's a lot of different stuff that you can get into, but the lowest hanging fruit that I always see is image optimization. So image optimization in a nutshell is adjusting the size, format, resolution of images to reduce file size while maintaining quality. Typically what a lot of people do who are non-technical individuals who manage a website is they'll have one that is well designed and created by a designer or a developer. It has all these images that are already optimized, and then when they create a new page, they'll just throw it up in any format, and then you'll have a web page that takes like 10 seconds to load, and that's not something that you want to have happen. So one of the first ways that you can do it without changing the file format is image compression. There are a lot of tools online. If you just literally look up image compression tool, you can find a million of them. Anything in the Adobe Creative Suite can do this for you, but there's lots of tools online where you can just drag and drop it into there. Cloudinary is another one where I can actually show you where you can get score rankings on the web pages, but we can touch on that at the end. But basically, compression is just reducing that file size by eliminating unnecessary data. If you worked with photographers, basically file formats that have the most data would be like RAW. If you have anyone who's a photographer, that's kind of like one of the heaviest file formats you can get. And then JPEG, and now specifically WebP is probably what you're trying to get a lot of these in. And WebP is the most balanced for website content that has good compression and quality. JPEG is probably what you're optimizing for a lot of the other time besides that. PNG supports transparency, but PNG is typically a much heavier file than like a JPEG or WebP. So typically you're optimizing for images to be JPEG or WebP, potentially a GIF if it has animations. Responsive, utilizing responsive image techniques. You basically just want to make sure that images are delivered in the appropriate sizes based on the user's device. There's a lot of different ways to do that. You can do that based on setting breakpoints in your image designer. But typically, again, what I see, especially for small businesses that do this themselves, is they optimize a website typically only for desktop, only on their own device that they built it on, and they didn't take a look at mobile, and all the images are the wrong sizes and they take up the whole screen. So you want to make sure that you're checking it typically on a desktop ratio format, like a laptop ratio format, a tablet, and mobile. Those are all things you want to check for. So search engine and mobile optimization, these are the things that we're going to touch on. Mobile first indexing, I already mentioned that, but basically your ranking is based on your mobile experience. So if you prioritize anything, prioritize mobile. Responsive design, that's responding to the different screens and orientations. A lot of that, you can do that in the website builders by setting the breakpoints, page load speed. These are a lot of the other ways that you can optimize that. So aside from file selection and compression, which we already talked about, browser caching and CDNs. CDNs are what you'd be looking into, especially for WordPress, that can help improve that load speed time without making, and that's kind of typically something that's plug and play. That's not something that you have to add a lot of work to the website to improve. A CDN can typically improve it pretty quickly. Mobile user experience, already touched on that. One of the other things I would add is avoiding excessive pop-ups. There are a lot of businesses that, whether it's ads or modals, a lot of different things, you want to make sure that the pop-ups are not excessive, intrusive, don't cover the whole screen, not difficult to close out of. Those are all things you want to avoid. Schema markup, this is one thing that is really important for SEO, especially if you're trying to get featured snippets, which featured snippets I have that at the bottom. But whenever you go on the web, and I can pull up an example of this at the end, but whenever you ask a question and you'll get Google that will have, usually in a black box, it has like a bullet pointed list that answers your question specifically. That is typically, those snippets are earned through schema, generally speaking. And that makes it easier for Google to parse your website and other search engines to parse your website and figure out, is this a bullet pointed list? Is this a recipe? Is this a review? Schema is basically little tags, microdata that you can add to define what type of content is on this page, so it's easier for websites to rank that content and to earn those featured snippets. And if you earn a featured snippet, a lot of time your traffic will improve a great deal. The only kind of counterpoint to that is if it's such a simple question that your featured snippet answers the question, potentially you can lose traffic from that. So that's kind of a whole can of worms that you can get into with SEO. But basically, featured snippets, if you're earning those, you want to be optimizing for typically like a list where, for people who just want the list of something, they can get the list quickly. But if they want the additional details, you're the first result that they click into. general analytics. So there's kind of a separation here between what I would say is general analytics and kind of more conversion or ad focused analytics. So separating those out and talking about some of these a lot. This is what I would say a lot of agencies, freelancers, and businesses don't really think about at all when they're thinking about their website build. And these are things that become more important when you're running, omni-channel campaigns. You're running, a lot of different traffic campaigns. You're running some ad spend. This is all infrastructure that needs to be in place, and you can either have it set up from the jump because a lot of these analytic tools they don't have a look back period before they're set up. So when your website is set up, from the jump, you would want to have Google Search Console and probably Google Analytics, because if you don't have some of these tools set up, you don't get that historical data. So those should at least be set up and claimed, even if they aren't configured. And the configuration part is what we're going to talk about here. So web analytics tools, like I said, Google Search Console, Google Analytics are the two that you're probably looking at from the jump. Those are both free. Gather, report, analyze your website data. Google Analytics is more if you're trying to get a super holistic picture of your entire website, whereas Google Search Console is kind of like the quick litmus test. It's also where you can submit your sitemap to make sure that your site is indexed. That's also a big problem that I see a lot of small businesses do is they pay for this great website and it's either partially or not indexed at all. And so one of the ways that you can do that is you get your sitemap. So after your URL, I can show you this at the end, you would type sitemap.xml, you go into Google Search Console and you connect it, and that basically tells Google, hey, here's my website, here's all the pages on my website, please tell everyone about it. That's essentially what that does. So you want to make sure that it's indexed, and that's one of the ways that you do that is through Google Search Console. Beyond that, again, for Google Analytics, like user behavior analysis, if I want to figure out which pages are popular, what is the path that people take to get to my contact page? Do they read 2 blog posts first and then they go to my pricing page? What does that user journey look like? That's typically what you'd use Google Analytics for. Optimizing your conversion funnel, again, Google Analytics is pretty good for this. Some people, there's a lot of different custom softwares that you can use to do this, but some tool to map out your entire funnel and figure out where are the bottlenecks. Do people get to a certain page and do they bounce from it because the load speed is too long? Do they not find the content that they need? That's kind of how you can create those analytics to map out that conversion path, that funnel. Part of the way that you do that is with event tracking. So event tracking becomes really, really important if you're running any kind of paid spend, because if you're running paid spend, typically the way that you set this up is that you have some kind of, especially if you're optimizing for conversion actions, that conversion action can be a purchase, it can be a form fill, and that's how you prove the ROI of your ad spend. So if you don't map out those key conversion tracking, those key events, you don't really have a way to optimize any of your ad performance. So you're not just dumping people on the page with no kind of conversion action. So typically you would have high priority, kind of like low priority, high value, low value event tracking. This becomes a lot more important in e-commerce, but typically for any other type of business, the main event that you'd be tracking is, a contact or other kind of form submission. And from that event tracking, you want to get, what is the source of that traffic? Did they, how many ads did they see? And then, when they converted, what is that kind of whole conversion path? That becomes a lot more important when you need to optimize your marketing spend. And a lot of companies who do website development won't set up that event tracking from the jump. So this is something that you would typically optimize after you create your website, especially before you start to run ad spend. But it's something that you should at least have the account, so like your Google Analytics set up before you start to get into setting all this stuff up. You'll save those agencies a lot of time when you want to do that. You want to familiarize yourself with common KPIs. So some of the more common ones with websites are bounce rates. So, like how long or how many people like bounce off the page when they visit, and that's the single page that they visited. Average session duration, that can be good or bad. Average session duration for, say, a blog post, like a long blog post, that would be good because people are, reading a good amount of the content. It's the same thing with like video views, how much of this video have people consumed, but certain pages that might not be good. So if you have something where people should be able to get information really quickly, like FAQs, that should probably actually be a little bit lower. If it's too long, people might have a hard time finding the information that you need. So average session duration, bounce rate, average session duration, pages per session. A lot of these, they're neither good nor bad. It depends on your goals. So like for an FAQ, Again, FAQ section, you would probably want that session duration to be lower because you want people to find the information that they're looking for quickly. So average session duration for like an FAQ page might be a positive signal, whereas for a longer blog post, that might be a negative signal. So you just want to understand, what do these KPIs tell me about the content that I'm putting out? And then traffic sources are going to tell you where you're getting traffic from. And typically this is organic search. So people are finding you for a related keyword, but not just typing your name directly into the URL at the top. If they're typing your name directly into the URL, that's typically called a direct search. So they don't actually even hit the search engine. They just go straight to your website. Organic search is basically finding you through the search engine. Referral and social are kind of hand in hand. Is if someone is reading, a blog post that you co-authored or a podcast that you were part of, and then they click from that to your website, that would be referral. And then social is the same thing. It's just a referral from a social network, essentially. And conversion tracking and pixels. So this ties again more into the ad and marketing side, but conversion events, those are the specific user actions or interactions like completing a transaction, downloading a resource that are deemed significant and signify the fulfillment of a set of objectives. So if you have a campaign where you're trying to get people to download an ebook, that's a conversion action. You have to set up a pixel and put the tracking code on there and connect it to your ad account to be able to get credit for those transactions. The way that you do that is with a tracking pixel, which a pixel, most people probably know what a pixel is, but a tracking pixel specifically is a small transparent image or a snippet of code that's embedded on the website within an email. It can also use it to, if you've ever determined or use a software like HubSpot where it says, this person has opened your email, that's how they measure that, is with tracking pixels. You can also add that on your website, and those are how you would pass that information back to a platform like Google or Facebook to optimize ad spend. Retargeting is a common strategy, especially for businesses that have people that are visiting them, especially where they have longer sales cycles and they need to slowly push them through the funnel. Retargeting is basically running some kind of ad spend that is targeting people that have visited your website before. So you're trying to get them back either for a repeat purchase or to slowly push them more the funnel. So if they first visited your website and read a blog post, you could set up a retargeting audience for everyone that has looked for pricing for a car. And then I can retarget them with ads of that specific car, except now it's a link to the purchase page, something like that. Attribution modeling, that applies to ad spend, but basically the value of each touch point in the conversion path. So again, Google Analytics getting that whole conversion path, especially if you have lots of different touches. So you see a Google ad, you click on a Facebook ad, you read a blog post, all of those touches have some kind of monetary value. And attribution modeling is, how many of those touches do we include? What value do they have? And then do we weight it, evenly across all those touch points? Do we weight it more on the last click? By default, a lot of these are typically 1 to 7 day window and last click. The only thing to be mindful of, which attribution modeling could really be its own entire presentation, the main thing to be mindful of is a lot of these softwares are optimizing for that kind of last click spend. So you will have an outsized impact of that typically in your reporting. So just be mindful of that when you're evaluating performance. And your agency, if you're using an agency, should be able to help you parse that information. And optimizing ad spend, again, conversion tracking pixel data, that's how you actually optimize your ad spend and determine, do I have a good return on investment for any of these ad campaigns? That's all dependent on having this properly configured. Security measures. So SSL certificates, that's one of the things that we talked about in the SEO presentation, basically just making sure your website is secure. The way that you can check if you have it or not, a lot of websites or website, search engines will have some kind of warning if you're going to a non-secure website. You've probably seen these. Quick way to check for it is if there's like a little lock next to the URL in your search. If it has the lock, it probably has the SSL. If it doesn't have the lock or there's a little X through it or gives you some kind of warning, you need to configure that. That's one of the most basic security measures that you should do for all websites, because a lot of search engines will actually block traffic to your website if you don't have an SSL certificate. You also want to do regular software updates. This is especially important for WordPress, which is again why I don't typically recommend WordPress for websites that are less than like 150 pages, because you have to worry about a lot of plugin updates and regular updates, and these are things that can break your website. A lot of the ones like Squarespace, Wix, Webflow, they don't have as many different things that you need to update, and they're typically updated automatically, so you can kind of not worry about that. So I would say the one consideration for WordPress is it has a lot of plugins, it has a lot of flexibility, but you need to make sure that you know what you're doing when you're adding these plugins because it can add a lot of bloat to your website, and that you know what you're doing when you're updating them. Typically, you would have a staging environment and then a production environment where you can monitor that. So if that's too much of a headache for you, you should probably stay away from WordPress until you have a site where you need that functionality and scale. I'd probably stick with one of the more simple drag and drop builders so you don't have to pay for an ongoing update and maintenance package. File permissions, user access. This is super important. It's also important for social profiles, Facebook pages. Like I see businesses lose access to their social pages all the time. You want to make sure that you have the right permission set up, the right access, that you have some kind of backup, that the super admin is properly configured, and then especially with employees, if you have employees or contractors and they are no longer working on the website, you should remove their access. I've also seen cases where you know employees who were recently fired still have access to the website, take it down. Agency, in certain cases, I'd say a lot of businesses can also get in trouble with bad acting agencies where you fire the agency locks you out of your website and takes it down. So you would want to make sure you have that control set up, how it works, and then also if you work with an agency or freelancer, you have some kind of plan to pass that access off or limit that access after the project is done, with the ability to give them access again if you need to work on different things in the future. And then security scanning and monitoring, again, this goes back to like SiteGround. A lot of those hosting providers have that built in, but you can get additional software on top of that if you need to do that. And then for maintenance and updates. So this kind of goes through a consideration of after the website is done, what can you handle internally versus what you should probably pay someone to do. So for regular content updates, non-technical owners, you can usually update the website content, the blog posts, product listings, contact information. So typically the way that we do website builds is for small businesses, the vast majority of small businesses, again, especially ones that are under 150 pages, but really under 50 pages especially, you don't really need an ongoing kind of update package unless you're also engaging in some kind of SEO optimization or blogging strategy. So we typically set this up to where, you have the keys to the kingdom. Essentially, we set you up with your own hosting environment, your own access, your own, say, Webflow instance, for example, and you have that access, you keep that access, and we just add ourselves to your account and remove it as necessary. Some people don't want that much control, so you just want to make sure that you have a sense of what access you have, what access you're giving, and then when you terminate that relationship with the employee, the freelancer, or the agency, what does that handoff package look like? Monitoring web performance. There are a lot of simple tools that can monitor website speed and uptime. There are a lot of free ones. Google Lighthouse is a good example of that. Some of the paid ones would be like SE Ranking, Ahrefs, Moz. A lot of those are in the SEO presentation, which again, I can get that to anyone who needs it, as well as some other tool recommendations. But you can typically monitor the speed and uptime yourself. And then when you have an issue is when you'd actually need to call people in. A lot of these reports can be run regularly and you only have to pay for this tool, once, or you need to pay for it monthly, and you can get a report. And then once you have a red flag, that's when you should probably engage someone to fix it. SEO update. A lot of people can update the keywords, meta descriptions, on-page content, but if you want more advanced SEO strategies, especially with like image file format optimization, if breakpoints, color contrast type stuff, anything more technical, especially when it impacts the layout, that's typically where you would want to engage a developer, some kind of professional with it. Security monitoring. Again, you don't really need security monitoring for the vast majority of websites that are non-WordPress that are smaller than 50 pages because that's kind of built into whatever that package is, 9 times out of 10. It is more important if you have WordPress, especially, although a lot of that monitoring, again, built into those, DNS, those hosting providers. But beyond that, especially if you need advanced security, I would say once you're crossing, like 5 or 10,000 visitors a month, and you have a lot of different people that have access to the website, that's where you'd want to look into it. Feedback and analytics review. Again, that kind of goes back into the biggest issue I think for a lot of businesses is that they just don't know what they're looking at. They don't know what the data is telling them. So I would say get a sense of the basic KPIs, understand the basic KPIs, and have someone walk you through it, and then set it up with a simple reporting structure to where it's easy to parse. But anything more complex where you have to parse a lot of data, you probably would want to have a data analyst or agency look into that for you. And then customization and feature additions, this really specifically applies to WordPress, but being mindful of just not adding a million different types of plugins for everything that you need, because it will slow down and bloat your website. And some of them have compatibility issues. They can have issues with interactions with your theme. So if you don't have a good sense of why you're adding a plugin and what that plugin will do to your website, and you don't know how to get the website back up from a backup, if you or restored from a backup, um, that's where you'd probably want to have a professional. Where you don't understand the impacts of your website and you aren't comfortable restoring it from a backup, then you'd probably want to have an advise someone who can at least take a look at this as a professional, to say, hey, this is a plugin that has no compatibility issues with any of the things that are already on your website, and if it does, we can implement that, test that in the staging environment before we roll it to production. The big thing that a lot of businesses deal with, especially if they don't have a developer, is they only have the production environment. So they push everything into production, and if it breaks production, they hadn't had backups in the past, they have no backup to revert to. Huge, huge problem. So especially WordPress, you should have basically a staging environment where you can do that testing and then push to production. There should be some step in between that. And a lot of small businesses, again, under 50 pages, you won't have that. So that's what you'd need to be mindful of. Again, especially if you're picking WordPress, you probably want to have a staging environment and someone who can tell you whether these plugins are going to break your website or not. Budgeting and cost. So this kind of goes over all the different categories that you can think about. And this is super, super high level, super approximate. It's all going to depend on what you need. But DIY website building. So considerations, your time investment. A lot of businesses, I totally get it. I have my own businesses. I know that, you kind of value your time at zero when you can get stuff done, but it is a big investment to, from time, from the learning curve, and then limitations, like something that might take you, 10 times, 20 times as long as it would take me. Maybe that's worth saving money on, but maybe it's not. Maybe you can get it done yourself, especially if you have some experience with design, with copywriting, your way around a website editor. So approximate cost on that. Templates, I typically see like templates somewhere between, 25 and on the high end for some premium templates, like $150, $200. There are a lot of different places that you can buy them from. Webflow, for example, if you just look up like Webflow templates, it will pull up a lot of different options that you have. I think that's a really good option for a lot of businesses, especially if you aren't creating some kind of new business. So like if you are a dog groomer, if you're a restaurant, if you are a construction company, don't reinvent the wheel. Get a template, fill it out, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Hiring freelancers, this is kind of the next step above that. So if you have, say you have some development experience, you don't have design experience, or you have some design experience, don't have development experience, a freelancer can help fill the gap. So maybe you only need a copywriter, you only need a designer, you only need a developer. That's good, where you only need one additional capacity to help kind of supplement your existing skill set. Typically, again, depends on the project, number of pages, features, but probably somewhere between 500 and 5,000 is what you could have a freelancer work on. And again, typically you'd be looking for a copywriter, developer, designer. I have had a lot of good experiences with platforms like Upwork. There's also Marketer Hire, and then on the more premium end, which I've worked on, mostly hiring developers, is TopTal. TopTal that typically starts at about like 95 an hour up to like 150 an hour. So that's like pretty skilled talent. Upwork is typically, at least for designers, developers, somewhere between like 15 to 50 an hour, and then you can get a little bit lower in Fiverr, but I would probably advise you to stay away from Fiverr. The quality on that website is typically not very good compared to Upwork or TopTal. The difference between Upwork and TopTal is essentially, TopTal is more premium, more expensive. You're going to pay for it. Upwork, you kind of have to scope and know what you have, and you have to basically kind of know what you're buying, to not waste a bunch of money there. Working with agencies, the benefit of working with agencies is really if you need help in multiple areas and you don't have time and you have the budget. So if you need copywriting and design and development and you have the budget for it, that's probably where you want to work with an agency. So agency, yeah, typically on the low end with a lot of agencies, if it's a custom design website, would be like $3,000 to $5,000. Our fixed price projects, start at like 1,500. You can get landing pages if you just need a single page website, even as low as like 500, 750. Below that, it's basically templates, and it can be super, super hit and miss. But if you're working with an agency, I would expect that budget typically to start around $3,000 to $5,000 and move up to, 50, 100. There can be very, very expensive websites for agencies. Totally depends on the scale. Um, and then hiring in-house staff, I would just say this is a consideration too of really the agency versus in-house. This applies to ad spend too. So again, the benefit of working with someone in-house is that you have full control. They're only focused on your project, but that salary basically has to be a better deal than having an agency handle it who has all this capability. So when you're hiring someone in-house, you might need a copywriter and a designer and a developer again. And so, all three of those, a pretty solid website team is going to run you, somewhere between 100,000 to 300,000 a year. And so until you have a website of that scale where you're saving more money than you would be paying an agency to manage that, that's probably where you'd want to consider hiring in-house. So vast majority of people are going to be somewhere between DIY and working with agencies. So with that, I'll kind of open to questions. Here's some of my contact information. The easiest one I would recommend is the booking link. I'm happy to do, one-on-ones, 15 minutes, any kind of question, but I can open up to some of those now.
What do you think is the best place to start to decide the type of website you need? So if we're looking at the difference between Webflow, WordPress, Shopify, is there an exercise that would be best to go through to determine what would be the best? Because you say 250 pages or under 250 pages, but honestly, I don't know what that means. If I'm writing stories, for example, that one of my business, I'm going to be writing stories about people and I'm going to put the story out there. Is that a page or is that, can I have 100 stories on a page? Or I don't know how that works.
Yeah, so basically a page for the purposes of this discussion is anything that essentially has its own unique URL. So if you have that story, which if you're writing stories and you plan to write a lot of stories, I would say WordPress is probably pretty good because you have to think about what these were originally built for. And so WordPress was originally built to be a blogging platform. So if you're going to be regularly publishing written content, WordPress is going to actually probably be the best option for you. Um, so any of those drag and drop builders, like I said, basically anything where you expect your website to really not ever exceed 250 pages. So if you're going to be writing content as part of your business, you probably want to go with WordPress. There are again other options for that, but you want to go with a platform that is built for long form or written content. And pretty much all those drag and drop builders are not really built for that at scale. Even if they say they do, you eventually hit scalability issues. You hit issues with being able to manage something like Duda is a platform that I actually used to use a lot. It's great, has drag and drop builder, but you can't publish changes to pages like in bulk. So like if I want to update, the color of a button, but I want to update it across my entire website, a lot of those drag and drop builders really, really struggle with that of pushing updates across an entire website. That's why I like Webflow. Webflow has a lot of these classes where you can basically create what would be called your design document, or you can create shared assets across hundreds of pages and push those updates to those pages without having to manually go through and change every single one. So basically any of the drag and drop builders should be really probably like a cap, like I said, of about 150 pages, and to where you don't anticipate continuing to publish content after that. So that's Squarespace, that's Wix. I'm partial to Webflow, but there's a bunch of different ones in that category. Any of the drag and drops less than that page count. Anything that is written content would be WordPress, and then anything e-commerce. 99% of the time, I would say Shopify. There's a bunch of there's like Magento, there's BigCommerce, there's WooCommerce. I'm just partial to Shopify, so I would say in your case probably WordPress.
If I
Um,
do want to eventually go into e-commerce though, and searchability, would WordPress continue to be the best option for that, or would Shopify be the best option if eventually you want e-commerce added? And I'm sorry, do you mean to interrupt?
Yeah, so that's where you really kind of need to go through a discovery call, to some extent to figure out exactly what your needs are. But there's a couple different ways to do that. So if you go with WordPress, you could use WooCommerce. So like that, you can integrate with that and stay on WordPress. There are e-commerce solutions for that, although I think they're slightly less than elegant. The consideration with Shopify is that Shopify doesn't allow a lot of customization. If you try to get deep into SEO and long form content writing, you can start to run into issues with that on Shopify. I've also seen some plugins that really don't play nice. So like if you want additional plugins and you're going to be writing long form content, and you still want the e-commerce functionality, you can probably do both of those on WordPress. Shopify, well, and I would say here's the other thing that I've seen people do. You can build the blog component in WordPress and then the e-commerce component in Shopify and just have those linked with like separate URLs. But I would say the downside on that is then there's, those are two separate websites and you don't necessarily have the same, um, ranking link juice of them all being on the same URL. There's ways around that to where you're getting into um, setting up subdomains and things like that, but that gets a lot more technical. So I would say still, even if you want e-commerce, but you want to be writing a lot of long form comment, probably still WordPress.
We should move on to some additional questions. Joe, I believe that Chandler answered your questions. That was Joe Gilmore's questions about the website builders that you recommend, and I believe you covered that. But Danny has a question. For those of us who have a website and are paying marketing company to help with SEO and other management, would you be able to go in and look at what I have and see if it needs anything else, or is there a cost associated for that?
So typically it depends. It depends on the agency that you engage. So I can, kind of speak more to what we do. So if you just want kind of a litmus test, what I would do is I'd pay for SE ranking, Ahrefs, Moz. If the agency is already doing SEO for you, they're probably giving you a report from some kind of tool there. So like all of those tools, you can pay for white labeled reports. And a lot of agencies, include that in part of their service, and they just white label one of those three tools. So I would say pay for one of those three tools, run, and they all have like a site audit, and you can check it, and you can check basically everything that you would need to check on your website. The free version to do that is Google Lighthouse, except Google Lighthouse only checks one page at a time, and it also only checks mobile versus desktop only one at a time. So if you're trying to run a audit on an entire website, you probably want to use one of those other paid tools. SE ranking is the one that's going to be the cheapest for SMBs. That's the one that I've used in the past. Ahrefs is kind of more marketing agencies. But to answer the question in terms of like an audit, typically when you engage an agency for that, there's kind of like a second opinion. It's really popular with in the medical field as well. Like a lot of doctors have a second opinion package. But typically it'd be, one of two things is we'd be running, kind of a quick report, which again, you can pay for one of those tools and run it yourself, but I can run that report for you and walk you through that. That's typically, free or very low cost. You can do a more comprehensive audit, which depends on the size of your website typically and the complexity of that audit. Those can be anywhere from low hundreds to several $1,000s. It's not going to be several $1,000s though if your website is under several thousand pages. If you're doing a paid audit, it'd be somewhere between, like 150 and maybe 1,000 at the upper end when it's not those custom audits. And then, of course, beyond that, then it would be looking at what issues you have and creating a scope to fix any of those issues. So, but most agencies, myself included, can at least run some kind of second opinion or audit for you.
Thank you. So Ms. Bolding asks she wants to know what your preferred method of contact is. And you might want to put your contact slide back up, Chandler, so everyone can get that.
Yeah. So I would say my preference would be either email to this email, the hotbutton.io, or that booking link, which is on my website. So either of these are good. Phones, please do not call me unless it's scheduled because I don't have that phone number actively monitored. That's just for scheduled calls. So either email or that booking link. And the booking link, I typically use Google Meet, but I'm flexible. I have an office on King Street too, so I can do in-person visits for people who are in Charleston and downtown.
Okay, here is another question. This may be a dumb question, but I use GoDaddy for my domain, but I get mail from a domain company saying I need to pay them to keep this domain. I assume this is a scam, correct? And I get emails, excuse me as I'm toggling, and I get emails where strangers are asking for access to my site. How do they do that, or are they just phishing?
Yeah, this actually goes into a much bigger category that again, Robert, hey, maybe this should be something that we touch on later is like, common scams related to that. But so if the email is actually from GoDaddy, which again, in the email, you would go in and check that, the domain from the sender to make sure it's an actual GoDaddy, domain. So check the sender of that email to see if it's coming from them. And if you're concerned about that, just go directly to the GoDaddy website and contact their support and figure out when yours expires and if you need to renew it. Typically, again, you're renewing these annually, but a lot of them offer a package where you get a discount to pay for 3 or 5 years. So just check when it renews, and check through GoDaddy's website directly if you're concerned about where it's coming from. And like I said, people finding your information, that's that privacy protection component. So I can do like a whois lookup. It's like whois.com or something like that, or .org. And I can actually see based on every URL, who is affiliated with that website. I can get the name and address that they have on file. So if you aren't paying for that privacy protection, that's how they can get your information. Another one that's really common for WordPress is if you type at the end of any URL /wp-admin, and that admin portal pulls up, like you don't have that admin portal secured, that is a vector where people can get their accounts compromised a lot. So that's why I typically stray away from WordPress unless you're willing to pay for a managed service, because you have to worry about securing that admin portal. You have to worry about spam. You get a lot more spam if you build a WordPress website, just because it's so much of the web. It's like 60 to 70% of the websites online. So there's all these tools that can crawl the websites and add a bunch of spam submissions in your contact form, so you defend against that with CAPTCHA. But I would say typically just with emails in general, check the domain of the sender. And if you're concerned, just go directly to GoDaddy and contact their support directly on the website, or call them directly on the website to figure out when your domain expires and when you need to renew it. I would say the other biggest type of spam that I see a lot is people who will just email you and tell you that your website isn't ranking. The quickest way to check this is if I go to, you can do site, so if you do like site and then a colon and hot button, you can see which of your pages are actually indexed. So this is like the quickest way to check it if you aren't using something like Search Console. So Search Console will actually give you a breakdown of all of those. But if you just type site and a colon, you can see if it's indexed or not. And a lot of these spammy type SEO companies will say, hey, your website isn't ranking. And you can check it yourself. They usually just lie. So if you get a cold email that says, hey, this is a company, your website isn't working really well, it's not discoverable, we can do it. This is the quickest way to check. There's also a lot of other ways that you can check indexing. And again, Ahrefs, Moz, SEMrush, SE ranking, those are all ones where you can check for indexing issues, because indexing is whether your website actually shows up here or not. So if you type site and colon and your website URL and nothing pops up, that means it's not indexed.
Thank you. So we did have another question, and I don't know if we're going to have time for this because it is after 2, but it was one that you said that you could demonstrate how to check Google Search Console at the end. Can you show that? Is that something you can do briefly?
Yep. And I will show you for green screen repairs, because that is one of the ones that has actually a lot of that data. That's good. And I'll show you both, because I can kind of compare what you see in each one. So, okay. So
we can't see your screen.
I'm about to share it. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, sir.
So this is what, like, more so than Google Analytics, because unless you're running ads, Google Analytics is honestly like kind of overkill. So I'll open both. But Search Console, when I was talking about that sitemap.xml, this is what I will show you. So green screen, here's.com/sitemap.xml. This is basically what you're submitting to Google. And so this is a list of all the URLs that you have that you're telling Google, hey, these URLs, they exist, and submit them. So when you go to Google Search Console, you'll have to link the property. You just click add a property right here and link it. And then sitemap, this is where you would enter that. So you would just copy and paste your website /sitemap.xml, and you would copy and paste that here. And so like Google says they found 13 pages. So you can then track which of them are actually indexed after you submit that URL. And what's really nice too, with this is you get, performance, you can see this, but what I like now is Search Console Insights. This is like the bite-sized version of the analytics that you can get. This is free. This will tell you how many visits you've had, since 2022. So I've had almost 6,000 people visit. Just for over the past 28 days, 505. These are some of the top pages that I have ranking and how many people are seeing them, how much time they're spending on the website, and which channels I'm getting traffic from, and what keywords I'm ranking for, and how high am I ranking for them. So like cell phone repair, that's number one, iPad number one, iMac number one. So that's again optimization for all these. That's the litmus test. That's the quick way to see all this stuff. Google Analytics, if you go into Google Analytics, it's probably going to be a little bit overwhelming for most of you all. But Google Analytics is what you have to set up and configure if you want, insights into geographically where people are going. I want a breakdown of how people get to those websites. I want really, really granular stuff, UTM tracking, things like that. So I would say Search Console is the basic one that's going to give you the really bite-sized digestible stuff to see.
Thank you. So I want to thank everyone for attending today, and please look forward to additional presentations from Chandler. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.